My beloved friends, let us come together for a few quiet moments, not to fill the mind with new ideas or to gather more concepts, but to return to that sacred place within, where all true teaching begins. For no spiritual truth has ever been revealed through the noise of human intellect, nor through the striving of personal will. It comes only when we grow still enough to hear what has always been whispering at the center of our being. There is a great truth, a simple truth, a living truth that Jesus offered to those who would hear. Yet for 2,000 years, humanity has rushed past it in its search for external signs, external powers, external salvation. Jesus spoke the truth plainly, but the world, conditioned to seek outwardly, could not understand the depth of what he revealed. The truth was not hidden by design. It remained unseen because the mind that looks outward cannot perceive what lives within. And so today we begin a gentle journey, not toward new knowledge, but toward the recognition of what has always been present. The purpose of our time together is not to add to your understanding, but to strip away everything that obscures your awareness of the one presence that has never been absent from your consciousness. For Jesus, the Master of Masters, did not build his ministry upon dramatic acts or outer instructions. He built it upon the invisible, the silent, the unobservable to physical sense. He withdrew often into the mountain, not to plead with a distant God, but to rest in the profound awareness of the presence that lived as his very being, and it was from this holy silence that his words and works emerged. When he said, "I can of mine own self do nothing," he was giving us the doorway. When he said, "The Father within me doeth the works," he was giving us the key. And when he spoke of the kingdom of God within you, he was telling us plainly where the only true contact with God takes place. This is the lost key the world has overlooked. All spiritual power, all realization, all healing, all transformation begins the moment we stop seeking God outside and begin recognizing God as the very life within us. Joel Goldsmith spent 40 years returning students to this single truth, reminding them again and again that the presence they long for is never reached through human effort, nor achieved through spiritual performance. It is realized only in the silence where the personal sense of self yields to the I that is God. And so, as we begin this exploration, we must understand what we seek is not a method, not a technique, not a spiritual exercise to produce outer results. What we seek is the same inner realization Jesus lived. From the awareness that God is the very substance of our own consciousness. This is the heart of the Master's teaching. This is the foundation of Christ consciousness. This is the single practice that opens the way. Therefore, as we continue, I ask only this: set aside the desire for outcomes, lay down the familiar habit of striving. We are not here to draw God into human problems. We are here to become aware that the presence which dissolves all problems is already here, already active, already the life we are living. Let us walk forward not as seekers, but as those who are ready to remember. My dear friends, before we can understand the silent practice that leads to Christ consciousness, we must first recognize why so many sincere seekers wander for years without finding what their hearts long for. These are not people without devotion. They are not lacking sincerity. They pray earnestly. They study diligently. They seek teachers, methods, affirmations, rituals, and systems. And yet, something remains incomplete. Something remains distant. God seems always out of reach. And the reason is simple, yet profound. All spiritual seeking begins with the assumption that God is somewhere else. And because the search begins with separation, it cannot end in union. For centuries, humanity has looked for God in the sky, in religious institutions, in sacred places, in holy objects, or in the person of a spiritual master. Some have sought God in emotional experiences, others in mystical visions, others still in the attainment of altered states. And yet the true presence, the living God, is never found in any of these, because God does not dwell in phenomena. Joel Goldsmith taught this with great clarity. You will never find God until you stop looking where God is not. As long as the mind extends outward, hoping that something external will rescue it, heal it, or satisfy its longing, it remains blind to the very presence that beats its own heart. This is why the search fails. Not because the seeker is unworthy, not because the path is difficult, not because God is withholding, but because the direction of search is turned outward toward that which cannot contain God. Jesus understood this. He did not teach people to look to him as a person. He taught them to look within themselves, for he knew that the same Father who lived as him lived as them. When he said, "The kingdom of God is within you," he was not speaking metaphorically. He was directing humanity back to the only place where God can be realized within one's own consciousness. But the human mind fears this truth. It prefers to seek outside itself because outward searching allows the ego to remain intact when we look to external sources. The personal sense of self continues to be the one searching, the one striving, the one working. And as long as the personal self remains central, Christ consciousness remains veiled. The truth is this: you cannot find God while believing you are the one doing the finding. God is not found by a person. God is revealed as the presence that the person has never been. And so, all external searching must eventually exhaust itself. Every path that leads outward must come to an end. Every attempt to change conditions, to manipulate circumstances, to attract outcomes, to persuade the universe, all must fail before the heart becomes still enough to hear the truth. Joel Goldsmith often said that the spiritual path begins only when one realizes that nothing external will ever bring God's presence into one's experience. He emphasized that God does not enter human life as a result of effort. God is revealed when we stop looking outward and begin to recognize the presence that is already living within us. Therefore, the first step on this journey is not to find a better method. It is not to refine prayer or intensify desire. The first step is to acknowledge that the outward search has been misdirected from the beginning. The one we have been seeking has never been absent. The presence we long for has never been hidden. It is only we who have wandered outward, believing that the light we seek shines somewhere beyond the horizon. Let us then, with humility and with quiet surrender, lay down the outward search. Let us release the belief that God is elsewhere, and let us turn inward, not into the mind, not into thought, but into the deep stillness where the presence lives as our very being. For until we make this turn, the spiritual path cannot truly begin. And once we make it, the journey unfolds in a way that is effortless, natural, and filled with grace. And now, my friends, having turned our gaze inward, let us look more deeply at one of the most misunderstood teachings ever spoken by the Master, his instruction to take no thought. Nowhere in Scripture do we find a command more central to the awakening of Christ consciousness. Yet nowhere do we find one more ignored, more softened, or more explained away by the human mind, Jesus did not say, take fewer thoughts. He did not say, take better thoughts. He did not say, think positively, or affirm your desires, or hold the right mental image. He said simply, take no thought. Why? Because Jesus understood something that the human mind cannot comprehend. The activity of thought is the activity of the personal self, and the personal self can never enter the kingdom. To take thought is to remain in the realm of human effort. It is to believe that through the power of thought we can reach God or manipulate the conditions of our lives. But thought is of the mind, and the mind is not the instrument through which God reveals himself. God is not known by thought. God is known only in the silence beyond thought. When Jesus withdrew to the hillside alone, he was not engaging in an exercise of mental activity. He was not visualizing success, shaping outcomes, or repeating affirmations. He was entering the great inner sanctuary where no thought is taken, where the personal mind grows still, and where the presence announces itself as the very life of his being. Joel Goldsmith understood this perfectly, and he made it the foundation of his entire ministry. He taught that the moment you begin to take thought about health, supply, safety, or harmony, you move away from the infinite and back into the realm of appearances. For thought is always tied to conditions, and conditions belong to the world of sense perception. But the kingdom, the Christ, the presence, does not dwell in the realm of thought. It dwells in consciousness itself. Take no thought is therefore not a poetic instruction. It is a doorway. It calls us to lay down the belief that we must manage life through mental effort. It invites us to release the burden of personal responsibility for shaping, controlling, and directing the outer world. It is a surrender, but not to fate, not to passivity, not to resignation. It is the surrender of the personal sense of self, the sense of me that believes it must achieve, must fix, must heal, must protect, must provide. To take no thought is to cease living from the level of the human mind and to begin living from the level of divine awareness. When the mind becomes quiet, not empty through force, but quiet through recognition, then the presence has room to reveal itself, and when the presence reveals itself, something begins to happen that thought could never accomplish. Peace arises without cause. Guidance appears without planning. Healing unfolds without effort. Supply flows without anxiety. Harmony manifests without manipulation. All of this happens because the personal I, the I that takes thought, is no longer the one attempting to live life. The divine I, the I am, begins to live the life through us. Jesus was showing humanity the principle of spiritual life. When thought ceases, God acts. When the mind grows still, the presence reveals its fullness. When personal effort yields, divine activity takes its place. This is why taking no thought is essential for Christ consciousness. As long as thought is active, the personal sense of self is active, and as long as the personal self is active, the awareness of the Christ remains obscured, not absent, never absent, but obscured, as the sun is obscured by clouds. Therefore, when Jesus says, take no thought, he is inviting us into a life where the mind is no longer the master, where the mind is no longer the source of guidance, where the mind no longer attempts to bring God into circumstances. Instead, we enter a life in which all things flow out from the presence itself. This is the beginning of true spiritual freedom. Not freedom from the world, but freedom from the mind's belief in separation. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from the burden of personal authorship. Not freedom from conditions, but freedom from the belief that conditions have power. Let us hold this truth gently in awareness. Christ consciousness begins where human thought ends. And so, as we move forward, we do so with a new understanding. We do not seek to think our way into the kingdom. We do not attempt to improve the quality of our thoughts. We begin by honoring the Master's instruction. We begin by letting the mind grow still. We begin by taking no thought, for in that sacred stillness, the presence that Jesus lived from, the presence Joel Goldsmith taught from, the presence you have always been, begins to make itself known. And now, beloved friends, having understood the futility of outward seeking and the meaning of the Master's instruction to take no thought, we arrive at the heart of our journey together, the one silent practice that opens the way to Christ consciousness. This practice is not complex. It requires no strain. It does not depend upon intelligence, memory, discipline, or religious learning. It asks only for a willingness to be still and to recognize what is already true. Joel Goldsmith called it the practice of the presence. But do not let the simplicity of that phrase hide the immensity of what it contains, for this is the practice through which the veil of separation dissolves. This is the practice through which the activity of the personal self yields to the activity of God. This is the practice through which Christ consciousness becomes a living experience rather than a distant ideal. Let us understand it clearly. The practice of the presence is not the attempt to bring God into your life. It is the recognition that God is already the life you are living. It is not a reaching outward. It is not an effort to contact something beyond you. It is a gentle turning inward to the awareness that the presence is here already, closer than breath, nearer than thought, more intimate than the sense of I. We begin this practice by pausing, perhaps for only a moment, and acknowledging silently, God is here, the presence is here, not as a belief, not as a thought to hold, but as a recognition that does not rise from the mind, but from the depths of our being. At first, it may seem that you are the one performing the practice, that you are the one making the effort. But if you continue gently, without strain and without expectation, you will discover something remarkable. The presence begins to practice itself in you. What began as your effort becomes an effortless awareness that arises on its own, like a flame kindled by a fire you did not light. The practice of the presence does not require words. In fact, too many words will draw you back into the mind, and the mind is the curtain that hides the light. A simple inner awareness is enough, an awareness that says, I do not walk alone. I do not think alone. I do not breathe alone. The presence is the very life that I call myself. This recognition does not instantly change conditions. Rather, it changes the one who is experiencing the conditions. It lifts you out of the personal sense of self and places you in the atmosphere of divine sonship and the awareness that Jesus lived from, the awareness through which he performed his works. And then, as you rest in this recognition, something begins to happen. Thoughts may arise, but they no longer claim you. Fears may surface, but they no longer define you. Problems may appear, but they no longer bind you, for you begin to feel, even if only faintly at first, that the presence which sustains the universe is sustaining you. You begin to sense that you are being lived, being breathed, being carried by a life greater than your human identity. The practice of the presence is not meditation as the world understands it. Meditation often seeks stillness as a goal. But the practice of the presence is not seeking, it is recognizing. It is the quiet acknowledgement that God is the only presence, the only power, the only life functioning here. It is the inner realization that you are not a separate self trying to reach God. You are the place where God is appearing as individual consciousness. You need not force silence. You need not suppress thought. You need not attempt to hold onto the presence. Simply rest in gentle awareness. If the mind wanders, let it wander. If thoughts come, let them come. The presence is not disturbed by the movements of the mind any more than the sky is disturbed by a passing cloud. As this practice continues, perhaps over days, perhaps over weeks, a new quality begins to enter your experience. A subtle peace, a quiet confidence, an inner stillness that does not depend upon circumstances. This is the fruit of the practice of the presence. This is the dawn of Christ consciousness. For Christ consciousness does not arrive with fanfare. It does not enter through visions or voices. It reveals itself in the gentle awareness that where I am, God is, and that nothing can ever separate me from the presence that is my life. The one silent practice is simply this: rest in the awareness of God's presence as your own consciousness, without asking, without seeking, without expecting, and allow that presence to reveal its own fullness in its own way. This is enough. This is everything. This is the secret the Master lived from. This is the way Joel Goldsmith brought countless souls into the realization of oneness. And this is the beginning of the life you were meant to live. My beloved friends, as we move into deeper waters of this sacred work, it becomes important to understand, not intellectually but intuitively, what takes place within you when you enter into the practice of the presence. The mind will not understand this at first, and it does not need to, but your awareness must be gently led into the recognition of what truly occurs when you rest in the silence where God is revealed, when you sit in quiet acknowledgement that the presence is here. The first thing you may notice is the activity of the mind. Thoughts arise, sometimes many, sometimes few. They come in waves, they pass in currents, they present themselves as problems, memories, distractions, or judgments. It may appear as though the mind grows noisier the moment you decide to be still, but do not be concerned. This is not a sign of failure. This is not a barrier to the presence. This is simply the mind revealing itself to you as it has always been. For you are not fully aware of the mind's incessant activity until you become still enough to witness it. And witnessing is the beginning of liberation. When you observe the mind without engaging it, you stand at the threshold where the human sense of self begins to loosen its hold. Joel Goldsmith often said, "The mind is not a power. When you see its movement clearly, you realize it has only the power you have unknowingly given it, and when you refrain from taking thought, you reclaim your awareness from the tyranny of mental activity. As you rest in this gentle recognition of the presence, something subtle begins to take place. The thoughts continue, but they no longer feel personal. They arise, but they do not cling. They pass through consciousness like birds crossing an open sky, seen but leaving no trace. You begin to discover, perhaps for the first time, that you are not the mind, you are not the thinker, you are not the one creating these thoughts. You are the awareness in which they appear. This shift from identifying with the mind to witnessing the mind is the beginning of spiritual freedom. It is the first dissolving of the personal self, and it is the first opening through which Christ consciousness floods into experience as the mind quiets, not through force, but through non-identification. A spaciousness begins to appear, a softness, a feeling of inner openness. This is not emotional peace. It is not a product of mood. It is the atmosphere of divine presence making itself felt. You may notice, too, that the problems you carried into your meditation begin to lose their weight. They have not been solved outwardly, yet their power to disturb you diminishes. Why? Because the mind that clings to the problem is dissolving. The awareness that believes the problem is real is yielding to the inner knowing that the presence is the only reality operating here. This is the miracle of the practice of the presence. It changes the quality of consciousness itself. And when consciousness changes, the world appears differently, not because the world has changed, but because the one perceiving it has awakened. As you continue resting in the awareness that God is the life of me, God is the mind of me, God is the presence here, another shift begins to take place. You feel less like a person trying to reach God and more like a witness to a presence that is functioning effortlessly through you. The thoughts slow, the mind softens, the personal sense of I grows faint, not lost, not destroyed, simply seen as an appearance without substance. And in its place, a new I begins to emerge, the I that is not of flesh, not of mind, not of personality, but of spirit, the I that Jesus referred to whenever he said, I am, not the personal I, but the divine I, the I that is God, appearing as individual consciousness. This is what is happening each time you enter into the practice of the presence, whether you feel it or not. The mind that has ruled you begins to step aside. The presence that has been hidden begins to reveal itself, and slowly, quietly, without fanfare, the divine takes its rightful place as the governor of your being. The mind is not being improved. It is being unseated. The ego is not being strengthened. It is being dissolved. The personal sense of self is not being uplifted. It is being replaced. And in this holy exchange, Christ consciousness begins to shine not as something attained, but as something uncovered, not as something added, but as something revealed, not as something brought in, but as something that was always present beneath the noise of thought. This is what actually happens in the mind during the practice of the presence. The human mind loosens its grip. The personal self loses its centrality, and the divine presence begins to live through you. This is the quiet miracle of stillness. This is what Jesus lived from. This is what Joel Goldsmith taught. This is what you are now entering, my beloved friends. Once we understand what truly takes place within the mind during the practice of the presence, we are prepared to see how this inner recognition quietly begins to transform every area of life that has been touched by fear, by lack, by illness, or by conflict. For the world believes that problems are changed by effort, by strategy, by action, by force. But the spiritual life reveals something altogether different. Problems are not solved. They are dissolved when consciousness is lifted. Let us begin with fear. Fear arises wherever there is a belief in separation from God, from safety, from supply, from peace, from harmony. Fear is the shadow cast by the belief that you are a self apart from the infinite, living a life governed by forces outside of you. But when you enter the practice of the presence, even for a moment, the sense of separation begins to loosen. You feel, though you may not yet fully understand, that you are not alone in this universe. There is a presence here, a presence that is your life, your breath, your consciousness. As this awareness deepens, fear has nothing left to stand on. Fear may appear, but it no longer finds a place to root itself, for fear cannot remain where the presence is recognized. And so, without struggle, without resistance, without argument, fear begins to dissolve into the nothingness from which it came. Now, let us look at lack. Lack is never the absence of things, it is the absence of awareness. Lack arises only when the mind believes it is the source of its own supply. When you think you must earn, acquire, protect, or secure your good, lack is inevitable because you are depending upon the limited resources of the personal self. But when you rest in the practice of the presence, you begin to sense, even if only faintly, that the source of your good is not outside you, it is not in people, it is not in circumstances, it is not in opportunities. The source is the presence itself, the infinite consciousness expressing as your very being, and as this truth dawns, the burden of seeking falls away, the anxious grasping relaxes. You stop looking to the world to supply you, because you now understand that supply flows from within, from the infinite living itself, as you then, without effort, without strain, opportunities appear, needs are met, ways open, not because you have attracted anything, but because consciousness has shifted from a sense of limitation to the recognition of infinite presence. Next, let us consider illness. Illness is not a punishment, nor is it a sign of spiritual failure. Illness is the outward expression of the belief that life is in the body, that the body is separate, vulnerable, and subject to powers apart from God. But in the practice of the presence, you begin to recognize that life is not in the body. Life is the presence of God expressing itself as conscious being. The body is an appearance in consciousness, not the source of consciousness. This recognition does not require you to deny symptoms or resist medical care. It requires only that you cease identifying yourself with the condition as you rest in the awareness of the divine presence. The belief in a life separate from God dissolves, and when the belief dissolves, the condition that rested upon it loses its foundation. Healing then emerges, not always dramatically, not always instantly, but inevitably, because the false belief that supported the illness has been replaced by the recognition of truth. The body responds to the consciousness that governs it, and when consciousness is lifted into the awareness of God as the only life, the body reflects that harmony. And finally, let us turn to conflict. All conflict, whether within ourselves or between individuals, arises from the belief in separate selves, separate wills, separate interests. But when you practice the presence, you come to see that God is the life of every individual, the consciousness of every being, the substance of all existence. You begin to see others not as personalities, not as flawed individuals, not as opponents or obstacles, but as expressions of the same one, presence that lives as you. As this recognition deepens, conflict loses its meaning. You stop reacting to appearances. You stop defending, attacking, correcting, judging. Instead, You rest in the awareness of the divine presence in those before you. And this shift, quiet, invisible, unspoken, becomes a healing influence in every relationship. The anger of others softens, misunderstandings clear. Harmony arises where discord once seemed immovable, not because anyone has been persuaded or changed, but because your consciousness has changed. And consciousness is the only true influence in this world. This is the great mystery. What the world calls problems are not problems. They are appearances, born of the belief that you are something other than the presence of God. And the practice of the presence does not fix appearances. It removes the belief that made them seem real. When the belief dissolves, the appearance follows. When consciousness is lifted, life becomes harmonized without effort. This is why Joel Goldsmith insisted that you need not struggle against fear, nor fight lack, nor wrestle with illness, nor repair conflict. Your only responsibility, your only work is to return again and again to the recognition of the presence until it becomes the atmosphere in which you live. In that atmosphere, fear cannot breathe, lack cannot form, illness cannot persist, conflict cannot anchor itself. For you have returned to the truth that Jesus lived from, I and my Father are one. And in that oneness, all things are made new. Beloved friends, as we walk further on this spiritual path, let us approach this next teaching with tenderness and honesty. Every sincere seeker, without exception, makes certain mistakes along the way, not because of weakness and not because of ignorance, but because the human mind is not capable of grasping the things of spirit. If we depended upon the human mind, we would all fail. But grace carries us, gently correcting our course, as long as we remain receptive. Let us then look at these mistakes, not with judgment, but with compassion, as Jesus looked upon humanity with the understanding that they know not what they do. And let us see how each mistake can be quietly transformed through awareness of the presence. The first mistake, trying to use truth to fix problems. The most common error is the attempt to use spiritual truth the way one might use a tool to fix, to repair, to improve the human condition. Perhaps you discover the practice of the presence and then immediately try to apply it to your finances, to your health, to your relationships. And when nothing happens quickly enough, you grow discouraged. But my friends, truth cannot be used. God cannot be used. Spiritual principles are not techniques. Truth reveals itself where the personal desire to manipulate outcomes falls away. If you come to this practice with an agenda, even a sincere one, you will find yourself frustrated because God is not governed by human intention. The divine is realized only when you relinquish the desire to improve your life and instead desire only to know God. The gentle correction is this: do not practice to change conditions. Practice to know the presence. Conditions will change as a byproduct of transformed consciousness. The second mistake, forcing silence or controlling the mind. Another mistake seekers make is trying to push thoughts away, to suppress mental activity, to achieve silence. But the mind cannot be silenced by effort. It is like trying to calm the wind by grasping the air. The human attempt to create stillness only reinforces the sense of a separate self, the very illusion we are trying to dissolve. Do not fight the mind. Do not resist its noise. Simply witness it. Recognize that thoughts do not hinder the presence. It is your identification with them that creates the sense of separation. The gentle correction is this: allow the mind to do what it does. Let thoughts rise and fall, without resistance. Rest not in the mind, but in the one who is aware of the mind. The third mistake, expecting immediate results. The human mind always seeks instant evidence. It wants signs, sensations, peace, healing, or improvement immediately. And when these do not come quickly, the mind concludes that the practice is failing. But spirit does not work according to time. The roots of transformation grow beneath the surface long before they become visible. Joel Goldsmith often stressed that the fruit appears only after the consciousness is prepared. You may not notice anything happening inside you for days or weeks or months, yet the soil is being softened. The inner ground is being tilled. The weeds of belief are being gently uprooted by divine activity. The gentle correction is this: release all timelines. Let the presence work in its own way, in its own rhythm. Your only task is to continue resting in awareness. The fourth mistake, believing you are the doer. Many seekers unknowingly hold on to the subtle belief that they are the ones practicing. They are the ones seeking God. They are the ones maintaining awareness. But the spiritual journey does not advance through personal effort. The moment you think you are accomplishing something spiritually, the personal self has re-entered through the back door. Grace is the only power. God is the only activity. The presence is the only practitioner. You are not achieving awareness. Awareness is revealing itself. You are not reaching God. God is expressing itself as your consciousness. The gentle correction is this: surrender the sense of personal effort. Let the presence do the practice in you. The fifth mistake, turning the teaching into intellect. Some seekers collect teachings the way others collect souvenirs, reading, listening, studying, analyzing, quoting. But spiritual truth is not understood through the mind. The mind can hold the words, but only the heart can receive the revelation. The danger of intellectual understanding is that it creates a false sense of attainment. One may speak beautifully, yet lack the awareness that gives life to the words. Joel Goldsmith warned repeatedly, truth must become a living experience, not a theory. The gentle correction is this: seek realization, not knowledge. One moment of silence is worth more than 1,000 teachings remembered by the mind. The sixth mistake, looking for signs, visions, or sensations. The personal self often wants spiritual fireworks, dramatic awakenings, angelic experiences, psychic visions, but these are distractions. They keep the seeker outwardly oriented, searching for phenomena rather than resting in the simple, quiet awareness of God. The presence is not loud. The Christ comes not as thunder, but as stillness. The deepest revelation is often the most subtle. The gentle correction is this: do not seek experiences. Seek only to be present with the presence. Let revelation unfold without expectation. The seventh mistake, trying to change emotions through will. Many seekers believe they must overcome fear, sadness, anxiety, or anger before they can experience the presence. They try to force positivity to correct their emotional state through effort. But emotions are not obstacles. They are simply weather patterns passing through consciousness. Your work is not to change the emotion. Your work is to recognize that you are not the emotion. You are the awareness in which it arises. The gentle correction is this: let emotions be as they are. Do not resist them. Do not indulge them. Rest in the awareness that is untouched by them. Beloved friends, every mistake we have spoken of arises from the same root, the belief that you, as a separate self, must achieve something spiritually. The gentle correction to every mistake is the same. Rest, yield, surrender, take no thought for your life, let the presence reveal itself, for in the recognition of God as the only self, every mistake loses its power. The path becomes simple, the way becomes clear, and the Christ, the divine presence within, becomes the guiding light. Beloved friends, as you continue to rest in the practice of the presence quietly, gently, without striving or expectation, there comes a time when something within you begins to shift. Not dramatically, not suddenly, not with fireworks or visions, but with the soft certainty of dawn rising over the horizon. Christ consciousness does not announce itself with noise. It reveals itself with stillness. Let us look together at the subtle, unmistakable signs that this inner awakening has begun to unfold within you. These signs are not accomplishments. They are not achievements. They are simply indicators that the personal sense of self is giving way to the divine. Self, that the I, which Jesus spoke of, is beginning to shine through the veil of the human mind. One, a growing sense of inner stillness. The first sign is often the least dramatic and yet the most profound. You begin to notice a quiet center within you that remains untouched by circumstances, even while the world around you moves in its usual rhythm. Even while challenges arise, there is a stillness beneath the surface. You feel a calm that is not created by thought, not dependent on events, but arising from within itself. This stillness is the presence. This stillness is the Christ. This stillness is the whisper of your true identity. 2, a softening of fear and anxiety. Fear does not disappear all at once, nor does it need to. But you begin to sense that fear is no longer the master of your life. It arises, but it does not grip you. You feel it, but you are not immersed in it. You watch it as though from a distance, knowing perhaps for the first time that fear has no real power over the one who rests in God. This is not the courage of the human self. It is the absence of fear in the presence of the infinite. 3, a reduced interest in controlling outcomes. The personal self is always trying to manage, shape, direct, and manipulate life. But as Christ consciousness awakens, you begin to feel less compelled to control. You sense that life unfolds according to a wisdom far greater than the human mind. You trust more, you relax more, you release the constant pressure to figure everything out. You discover that surrender is not passivity. It is resting in the assurance that God is the governing presence. 4, a new way of seeing others. One of the clearest signs of awakening is the transformation of perception. You begin to look at people differently, not as personalities, not as problems, not as obstacles, not as separate selves. You begin to sense the same presence expressing itself through every individual you meet. You look at those who challenge you, who misunderstand you, who oppose you, and something within you whispers, this too is God appearing. It does not mean you condone harmful behavior. It means you see beneath the behavior to the divine. Reality 5, a spontaneous compassion you did not try to cultivate. Christ consciousness does not make you sentimental. It makes you aware. And in that awareness, A natural compassion arises, not the compassion of sympathy, but the compassion of understanding. You do not feel sorry for others, you feel connected to them. You sense their divine essence, even when they do not. This compassion does not drain you, it flows through you as the activity of God's love. 6. A deeper sensitivity to inner guidance. You begin to notice subtle impulses, quiet promptings that are not thoughts, not emotions, not desires. These promptings are gentle, yet they carry a clarity that the mind cannot produce. You find yourself doing the right thing at the right moment without planning it. You speak words that heal without preparing them. You avoid paths that once tempted you. You walk into situations with awareness rather than reactivity. This is not intuition. This is divine intelligence revealing itself as your consciousness. 7. A dissolving of the sense of hurry. The world hurries because it believes something can be missed. The awakened soul knows nothing essential can ever be withheld. That which is yours in spirit cannot be taken, cannot be delayed, cannot be lost, and so hurry dissolves. You move more slowly, not outwardly, but inwardly. You become aligned with the rhythm of peace. 8. A lessening of personal importance. As Christ consciousness dawns, the personal sense of I becomes lighter. The need to be right diminishes. The desire to be seen, admired, validated, or understood falls away. You feel content to be silent, content to be unknown, content to walk the path without recognition. This is not self-denial. It is the freedom of no longer needing to be the center of your world. 9. A quiet joy that has no cause. Perhaps the most beautiful sign of all is the emergence of joy, not excitement, not pleasure, not happiness born of favorable conditions, but joy without reason, a joy that arises from nowhere, belongs to no one, and depends upon nothing. It is the joy of being itself. It is the joy Jesus knew when he said, "My joy I give unto you." It is the joy of the infinite expressing itself as you. 10. A subtle certainty that you are not alone. There comes a moment, perhaps in silence, perhaps in the midst of daily activity, when you feel a presence so intimate, so familiar, so loving, that you can only rest in awe. You do not see anything, you do not hear anything, yet you come to know, without explanation, that you are not living your life alone. Something is living you. Something is guiding you. Something is carrying you. This is the dawning of Christ within. This is the awakening of the divine self. Beloved friends, these signs may appear gradually, subtly, and without fanfare. But when they appear, know that the seed has sprouted, the dawn has broken, the light has begun to shine. You are awakening, not to a new self, but to the self that has always been present behind the mask of the human identity. You are beginning to live from the same consciousness that animated Jesus, that illumined the prophets, that inspired the mystics, that Joel Goldsmith devoted his life to revealing. This is the Christ awakening in you. And now, beloved friends, we come to the closing of this journey together, not as an ending, but as a gentle return to the beginning. For everything we have explored, everything we have contemplated, everything that has stirred within you leads to one simple, timeless truth. The presence is here. The presence has always been here. The presence will never leave you. This entire teaching, this entire path, every practice, every silence, every recognition brings you back to this one point of awareness. God is the life of you, not far off, not hidden, not waiting to be found, but living as your very consciousness in this moment. You do not become spiritual. You do not rise into Christ consciousness. You do not attain divine awareness. You simply awaken to what has always been true. As you go forth from this message, do not carry it as knowledge. Do not attempt to remember every word. Do not place these teachings on a shelf in your mind. Instead, allow them to dissolve gently into the inner silence where the real work is done. Let them sink beneath thoughts and become experience. For truth bears fruit only when it becomes living awareness, not information. It must be lived, not learned. It must be realized, not recited. We return now to the one practice that makes everything possible, the silent resting in the presence. This is the doorway. This is the fountain. This is the source of all healing, all supply, all peace. Nothing else is required of you. No rituals, no strain, no effort, no seeking, simply the gentle turning inward again and again to the awareness, I am not alone. The presence is living me. As this recognition deepens, you will discover that the world loses its power to disturb you. Circumstances lose their ability to intimidate you. People lose their ability to define you. Problems lose their power to anchor you. For you will know not with the mind, but with the heart that only one life is living, all creation, and that life is expressing itself as you. Wherever you go, you will carry the atmosphere of this presence, not because you try to help others, not because you preach or persuade, but because the Christ within you becomes a quiet radiation of peace. There will be moments when you find yourself pausing naturally throughout the day, without effort, without intention, simply because the presence is so near. You will feel the invisible companionship that Jesus spoke of when he said, I am with you always. You will sense that something greater than the personal self is guiding, sustaining, lifting, and unfolding your life. And as this awareness matures, you will realize that your spiritual journey is not a path you walk toward God. It is the path through which God reveals itself as your life. You have not moved closer to God. You have awakened to God as the only life there is. As we close this teaching, let us rest for a moment in the silence that is not empty, but full of presence, full of peace, full of the quiet assurance that the infinite lives here, now. As you let your breath soften, let your mind fall into stillness, let your heart open like a flower receiving sunlight, and hear this truth, not as words, but as the voice of the presence within you. Where I am, God is. Where God is, all is well. I am. Carry this awareness gently with you. Return to it often. Rest in it quietly. Let it guide your steps. Let it shape your days. Let it reveal the life that has always been yours. And may the Christ that is your true self shine more brightly with every moment, until the personal sense of life dissolves completely into the living presence of God. Peace be with you, beloved friends. Not the peace the world gives, but the peace that comes from knowing God is the only presence, God is the only power, God is the only life, and that life is you.